All right, so this is the regular City Council meeting for September 8th for the City of Minnetrista. Our first order, I'd like to ask that you all join me while Allie Paulfus says the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So with that, we'll move on to introductions or roll call, as we say now. We'll start with Mike Baroni.
I am here, Mayor.
All right. Chief Paul Falls.
I am here.
Community Development Director David Abel.
I am here.
Finance Director Brian Grimm.
I'm here.
And Public Works Superintendent Gary Peters.
I am here.
Thank you. And Chris Lindquist, our City Clerk.
I am here, Mayor.
Thank you. And Allie Paulfus, our Director of Administration.
I'm here.
And then we have, let's see, I'm Lisa Whalen. I'm the Mayor. And also Council President are Shannon Bruce. Are you here?
I'm here.
John Chumperland.
Here.
Mike Molitor.
Here.
Pam Mortensen. Here. And also we have City Engineer Allison Fauski with WSB.
I'm here.
And we also have Attorney Ron Beatty with Kennedy and Graven.
Here.
And I believe later on, Joe Savvy will be joining us as well. So, and then Allison, is Adam Gabois with us this evening?
I'm here, Madam Mayor.
He is. All right, thank you. Did
Mayor,
I miss anyone? Yes?
No, Mayor, just before we get rolling, I just wanted to let people on this call know that now that the filing period has ended for city council candidates, we invite council candidates to be able to participate by listening to the ongoing city council work sessions and council meetings. So Kathleen Refkin and Ann McGregor are on this call. They'll probably be on all the future calls between now and election day. And obviously they don't have a speaking part, but they're, we send them the packets now. So now they're, as candidates, they're being hooked into these meetings. So I just want everybody to be aware of that.
Yep, thank you. All right, so our first order then is to approve the agenda. Are there any other additions or changes to the agenda?
Madam Mayor, this is Shannon. I do have an additional agenda item, and I'd like to add an item to discuss reinstating the ability of residents to address the council by speaking during the persons to be heard part of the meetings, not just by email, but by actually speaking during the persons to be heard section. If we could add an agenda item to discuss that.
So council, would you like to do that this time or next time? Or not at all? What is we can discuss it.
Is there a reason why we couldn't do that?
I think that's what the discussion would be about.
I think that would be the discussion, yeah.
Discussion. Well, then I guess then a discussion about it, so.
All right. John and Mike, do you want to weigh in? Are you okay with adding this to the agenda?
You put that under business items?
Correct.
Yeah, it would just be discussion items. All right, so we'll add, it would be item number E. It would be under business items number E. Okay, so any other changes or additions? Hearing none, then is there a motion to approve the agenda as stated with that addition?
This is Shannon, so moved.
Is there a second?
This is John, I'll second.
All right, a motion has been made and seconded, and all those in favor will signify with aye. Pam Mortensen?
Aye.
And Mike Molitor?
Aye.
And Mr. Chumperland?
Aye.
And Shannon Bruce?
Aye.
And Lisa Whalen, I'm the mayor. I vote aye, so motion passes 5-0. So we'll move on to persons to be heard. Mr. Baroni?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I actually do have one email to read, and it's, I think, very timely because we'll be discussing this on our business agenda tonight. So this came from Michelle Bottenfield, who is the West Tonka Food Shelf Director, and she addressed that to me and wanted me to read it tonight at our council meeting. So she says, the West Tonka Food Shelf would like to make a formal request to be considered for COVID-related funding by the city of Minnetrista. West Tonka Food Shelf is a 100% donation-supported organization operated by 100% volunteer staff. We distribute, on average, 60,000 pounds of food to over 750 local families each month. We're open 6 days a week. Throughout the pandemic, West Tonka Food Shelf has been able to access food grant opportunities for food procurement through our partner offerings, as well as through food rescue groceries from merchants in our area. This has been a wonderful opportunity, except we have had to turn away some food due to a lack of refrigeration and freezer units within the West Tonka Food Shelf facility. We have also had to borrow freezer space from Our Lady of the Lake Catholic Church, which is not sustainable during the academic year. Additional refrigeration freezer units would allow us to distribute more meat items and fresh perishable products to our patrons, which helps our efforts to offer healthier options to our patrons. We could use $48,000 for refrigeration and freezer units, which would cover 2 combo refrigerator freezer units for the lobby, 1 commercial stainless steel dual freezer wall unit, side-by-side large freezers, and 5 commercial large chest freezers. This would allow us to add to our overall refrigerator and freezer units, as well as replace broken equipment. Please contact me if you have any additional questions or concerns. So as I stated before I read this, is that we do have a discussion tonight on the CARES money later on in our meeting, and I'm sure this will just be, I think, added to the items to discuss. So with that, Mayor, I don't have any additional things for persons to be heard.
I think, okay, we did have another email from Colin Charles, and he wanted to do a special presentation to the council. And he wanted to speak under persons to be heard, and we're limited to the 3 minutes, and the way we were doing it is via email. So I suggested that he request of the council if he could come at our next meeting and do a special presentation. And so I'm bringing that forward, and if that would be okay with the council, he'd like to talk to you about his request for the West Tonka School District. And I also suggested that if he came and did the presentation, that we should invite the school superintendent, Kevin Borg, to attend with him at the same time in case there's additional questions that the council may have. And I did make it clear I'm not making any promises or any commitments, but I think it would be fine if he came and did a presentation. And with that, I also want to say it was not my understanding that we're going to be making decisions this evening on how the money is going to be spent. We're going to be informing ourselves as to what we are allowed to spend it on. And then I was hoping maybe next time at our next meeting, we would then make some decisions as to what we're going to be spending the relief funds on. With that said, are you okay with Colin Charles coming next meeting and doing a special presentation? It'd be a 10 to 15 minute presentation. Pam, I'll ask you first.
I am fine with that.
Okay, and Mike Molitor?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I don't know. We're not broadcasting for requests here, but that's fine.
Yeah. Ms. Bruce?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
All right, and Mr. Chamberlain?
Clarification, we would entertain him under special presentations versus persons to be heard?
Yes, because our persons to be heard is basically 3 minutes, and he really wanted more time and also wanted to have the opportunity to have some dialogue with the council. And so the special presentations was a little more appropriate for that versus persons to be heard.
Agreed.
Okay, all right, so we will extend that invitation to him for our September 21st meeting. Mr. Baroni, can you put that on your calendar?
Mayor, I will.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll move on to our consent agenda items. Any other emails under persons to be heard, Mr. Baroni?
No, Mayor, nothing else.
All right, thank you. Consent agenda items, approve our work session. Are there any that you wish to remove?
This is Shannon. There are 3 I'd like to take off. The first
And which
one
ones
is
are
the C, D, and E, the work session minutes for 8/17, the council minutes for 8/17, and claim.
All right, C, D, and E, and claims. All right, that leaves A, B, F, G, H, I, and J. Are there any others that need to be removed? Hearing none, then the consent agenda items consist of approving our work session meeting minutes from August 3rd, 2020, approving our, if I'm correct, approve the City Council regular meeting minutes from August 3rd, 2020. F would be approve our Second Amendment to Master Development Agreement with Woodland Cove. G would be a resolution to accept improvements for Woodland Cove, second edition. H is a resolution to end the local emergency order. And I is a resolution to approve the amended and restated conditional use permit at 1800 Retreat Circle. And J is approve the 2021 and 2022 sewer jetting and lift station cleaning. Is there a motion to approve those consent agenda items?
This is
So
John.
moved. This is Pam.
Okay, Mr. Trumperlin made that motion and Ms. Mortensen seconded that. So all those in favor will signify with aye. Mr. Trumperlin?
Aye.
And Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
And Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
And Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Lisa Whalen. Motion passes 5-0. So Ms. Bruce, you had number C and D removed?
Yes, on page 17 of the minutes, if you go there under item C, the resolution to, it was an overlay project, the third bullet where there's a change order about Fielding Trail, it says in that second line, it amounts to $4,394. I think that was supposed to say $34,394. So the $30,000 typo there.
It's on
Do you see
17, I see change order results in a contract addition of $34,394 on page 17.
Yes. In the third
Mine
bullet.
says-
I see what you
bullet?
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see where you're
Right.
where you're talking.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. That was
that I will
it.
get that changed.
Okay. And then do we approve that, or do I make all the changes and then approve those 3?
Well, do you have any other changes on this work on the work session?
No, the work session that was
Okay,
the
then
only
we
one.
then we should make a
approve that
motion.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the work session minutes for 8/17.
With that change. All right. Well, with
With
that
that change.
correction, I should say. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Hearing none, then all those in favor signify with aye. Ms. Bruce?
I think, did someone second that?
Oh, I'm sorry. We needed to second that. Thank you.
I'll second
Were you
that.
doing that, Pam? Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So Pam seconded that. Then Ms. Bruce, you vote.
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
And Mr. Trumperlin?
Aye.
And Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Lisa Whalen. Motion passes 5-0. So we move on to approve our City Council regular meeting minutes from August 17th. Ms. Bruce?
Thank you. On page 18, if you scroll down to item E, the CARES Fund discussion, there was a concern expressed that I expressed about spending CARES Act funds on budgeted items that were included in the city's budget prior to the pandemic, and more specifically, when those items were not clearly substantially used for COVID-19 related activities, and that's not reflected in the minutes. And I'm not asking for a quote here. I would just like it recorded in our minutes that this was a concern expressed. I don't even care if you attribute it to me, but I think it was a significant enough concern that it should be in the minutes. And I'd suggest if you don't remember that concern being expressed, I'd suggest going back and listening to the audio to verify that it was, unless we can all agree that it was since we were all there. But either way, it needs to be recorded in the minutes. It was a significant concern and not just something to be referred to as, I think it was, it just says there was further discussion. But I'd like that concern reflected in the minutes because it was significant.
Do you have some kind of suggestion as to how you would like it referenced?
Yes, as I said, I would say there was a concern expressed about spending CARES Act funds on budgeted items included in the city's budget prior to the pandemic.
Okay. Maybe, Chris, can you add that, and then we'll bring those back?
I can, but I have a request of Councilmember Bruce. Could you just send that to me in an email?
Sure.
And then that
I'll
way
send it to you right now.
Okay, I appreciate that. That way,
yep.
Yeah, I was trying to write fast, but I didn't catch everything. So.
Yep, I'll send it to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
So we'll bring those. We'll bring those back.
Yep.
All right. Next, then we have approval of our claims, and you had a question on that, Ms. Bruce?
Yes, on page 27, under legal fees, Kennedy and Graven, there's a $945 charge, and it says COVID-19 matters. And I didn't see the 2 asterisks there for designating that was, is that a COVID expense? Are we charging those fees to COVID? I guess that's a question for Brian.
Mr. Brian?
Yeah.
Brian?
Yep. Oh, yep. Thanks, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Bruce. Yeah, that is being added to our spreadsheet of like the COVID cost. It just, the asterisks were missed, and I think one other council member caught that today too. So that, has been added to our list of expenditures, and that was COVID related expenditures.
Okay, that was all.
All right. So then is there a motion to approve the claims as presented? Oh, are there any other questions? Yeah.
There is.
Okay.
On page 28, we have an expenditure for to Minnesota Playground for $1,155. Trash cans for the walking trail. I'd like to see that taken out of the park fund, not the general fund, because it's a capital item that would be, I think, park relevant.
Right.
So I'd like to see that change if there's support for that.
Well, just a question though. Can, Brian, do you know, can we use park funds for that since it is a capital expenditure?
Yeah, Madam Mayor and Councilman Molitor, I'd feel okay using park funds for that. I guess trash cans are, they're capital items that you can see and they're used for a while and stuff. I mean, it's not really a maintenance item. That's where I get more nervous about moving things to the park dedication fund. So I would be fine with moving that to that fund.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, is there a motion then to approve the claims with that adjustment to the fund, to the park fund?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, Mr. Molitor, hold on. Mr. Molitor made the motion, and I believe Ms. Mortensen beat you to it. So,
nope, it wasn't me. I think it was Shannon.
Oh, it was. Okay. All right. So Mr. Molitor made that motion, and Ms. Bruce seconded that. So all those in favor signify with aye. Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
Ms. Bruce,
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen,
Aye.
Mr. Chamberlain,
Aye.
and I, Lisa Whalen, vote aye. Motion passes 5-0. So that concludes our
Mayor?
consent. Yes?
Point of order. So on 4D, the concern that Councilmember Bruce mentioned about spending money unless it was done prior to the CARES fund. Did we need a motion on that? I know we had a motion on the first item.
No,
Did we?
we're going to bring those minutes back.
Okay, so we're good
Yeah,
with that?
Yeah, we'll bring those
Yes.
back at the next meeting so that
Okay.
we can all see the change. Yeah.
No problem. I just didn't see recall a motion. I just wanted to make sure we were good with that. So sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that then does conclude our consent agenda items. So we'll move on to our business items. First, we're starting out with our budget process approvals. I believe that's Brian, Mr. Grimm.
I
Hello?
started talking. Yeah, no one can probably hear me. Just when you don't hit the mute button again. So I'll start again for the echo for myself, but now you'll actually all hear me. So so this starts on page 91 of the packet. So it's, as you see on the agenda, there's the three items that we do each year: the approving the preliminary tax levy, approving the debt levy at 100% of the bond payments instead of 105%, and then the public comment date. So, but we'll start with, I guess, item I, which is the preliminary tax levy, and that's on page 91. So we basically had a couple of good discussions on the preliminary budget and levy and both the August 3rd and August 17th council meetings. Basically, at the end of the August 17th work session, there seemed to be a consensus on the council members on setting the 2021 preliminary levy as presented. One of the things that was updated since the last meeting is we actually got our fiscal disparities numbers, which came in at about 154,000. It's reflected in the numbers, 154,244. So it actually brought our net levy down to under 3%, 2.78% to be exact, about $133,651 increase from 2020. And you can see on the memo there on page 91. So the preliminary levy the gross levy is the $5,097,602, and then once you subtract the 154,244 from the county, the net levy is the $4,943,000. Later in the packet here, but that's the net comes down by that amount there. So as as in previous years, we're certifying our preliminary levy by the September 30th deadline. It's a ceiling or maximum. Once that's set, the preliminary levy to the final levy, it can't be increased. It can either stay the same or go down. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. If you go to page 92, that's the more the official resolution showing the gross levy there, the $5,097,602, and the different components to the general fund, roads, the capital, and then the different special levies or debt levies. A couple other pages are just what we certify to the county. Then on page 94 and 95, just showing those items there. Page 96 has the breakdown showing the difference from year to year. It also has our projected tax rate showing there, and showing that our tax rate is going down there also. Probably page 98 shows, I think we've seen that slide a couple times, but with the updated projected tax rate of 23.37%, you can see most people, if they are, on average, a 4% valuation increase, which is projected to be sort of the mean or the average, I guess, based on our levy, most people would see a slight decrease to their taxes from 2020 to 2021. So I guess I stand for any questions from council. Otherwise, the resolution on page 92 is what we'd be looking. 92 and 93 is what we'd be looking to adopt tonight.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, does council have any questions of staff or comments? Okay, then then I assume that you would like to approve this. So this is approving the preliminary levy for the 2021 tax levy. So it's a 2020 tax levy collectible in 2021. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Pam.
Okay, Mr. Molitor made that motion and Ms. Mortensen seconded that. Are there any other questions or comments? Hearing none, then we'll signify with aye. Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
Mr. Chamberlain?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Lisa Whalen. Motion passes 5-0. So we'll move on to our next item, which is approving the debt levy at 100% of the 2021 bond payment. Mr. Grimm?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. So this is something that we've done the past, I don't know, it's probably at least since I've been here, predates me. I mean, we've had good enough collections in our tax and debt levy funds that we've been able to levy at 100% of the principal and interest of the next year's bond payments versus the statute allows up to 105%. So, but the county each year, I guess, requests that we do this so that they know why we're deviating for what the maximum that we could levy in these debt funds. So the on page 99, you'll see there the memo, and then page 100 is the resolution to do that. I guess in the second paragraph on page 99, it shows that if we would levy that additional 5%, it would add up to about $39,000. But obviously through this resolution, we're not requesting to levy that, and we're levying the debt levy as that was presented in the previous resolution we just adopted. So unless there's any questions, we'd be looking for to adopt that resolution to approve the debt levy at 100% of 2021 bond payments.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Any questions, Council? Okay, hearing none then. Is there a motion to approve? It would be resolution number 099-2020, adopting a debt levy for 100% of the 21 bond payment.
This is John T. So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
This is Shannon. I'll second.
Okay, motion has been made by Mr. Chamberlain and seconded by Ms. Bruce. And all those in favor signify with aye. Mr. Chamberlain?
Aye.
Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
And Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Lisa Whalen. Motion passes 5-0. So we'll move on to the last budget item, and that's approving the date for the public comments on our 2021 levy and budget. Mr. Grimm?
Yes, Madam Mayor and Council. So this is the last item here. It just needs to be adopted by motion as per statute. The city must select a date to discuss the budget and property tax levy for 2021. Basically, it's any time after the end of November, we can discuss that, and our first meeting that comes after that, and I think our only regularly scheduled meeting right now for December is at December 7th. So what we'd be looking to do is set the public comment meeting, which sort of, its predecessor was the truth and taxation hearing, but now it's called the public comment. But that would be, we're looking to be a motion to approve December 7th of 2020 at 7 p.m. as the public comment date for discussion on the 2021 budget and tax levy.
Okay. Is there any questions or comments? Pretty straightforward. So is there a motion to approve December 7th at 7 p.m. as our public comment date for discussion of the 21 budget and tax levy?
This is Shannon.
Okay. Ms. Bruce made that motion and Ms. Mortensen seconded. How's that? So Ms. Bruce, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
Mr. Chamberlain?
Aye.
Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
And Lisa Whalen, I vote aye. Motion passes 5-0. So I believe that concludes all of our budget items for now. we'll move on to item number B, and that's approve our professional services agreement and authorize preparation of feasibility report for the 2021 local street improvement projects. Ms. Fauski, I think that's you. If you could kind of preface it or kind of give us a little bit of background as to what was discussed briefly at the meeting, and then we'll move on from there. Ms. Fauski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Adam Gatbois is on the call to go through the proposal in detail, but just to recap the discussion from the work session earlier this evening, when looking at a 2021 local improvement project where a portion of the project cost would be assessed, there's some discussion of including Minneapolis Avenue. And the reason we have this professional services agreement on the council agenda this evening is because there is a portion of a project area that was previously identified that has some wetland conditions. And in Minnesota, the growing season for wetland delineations typically ends around I believe it's October 15th is the cutoff date. And so we were running up against a little bit of a deadline in that respect to get an agreement in front of the council to go and get that component completed. And that's why we have a professional services agreement presented as such. So when we're looking at options, knowing that the council now has a desire to include Minneapolis, an option is to either approve the professional services agreement as presented this evening, and then at the next council meeting we can go and request an amendment to that professional services agreement to include Minneapolis Avenue, or an alternative would be to authorize the wetland delineation component only at this time, with a revised professional services agreement for the remainder of the project design and feasibility study to be brought at a future meeting, or if the council desires to not act at all at this point, that would certainly be another option. So with that, I'll hand it over.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm jumping the gun here. Sorry.
That's okay.
Ms. Fauski, let me ask you something. If we decided to do the wetland delineation now, would you be able to bring back the feasibility study for Minneapolis, Hardscrabble, Loring, and Stonebridge by our next meeting?
Professional services agreement for that? Yes, we could.
Excellent.
Yep.
Okay. And then the other question is, do you know if there's any wetlands that would be impacted with the Minneapolis Avenue? I don't think there are, but just kind of trying to think ahead if there are.
Madam Mayor, this is Adam Gabois. Great question. There shouldn't be, as we look preliminarily at the National Wetlands Inventory. So I don't think we need to authorize anything for wetland delineation over there on Minneapolis.
Okay, thank you. All right, Council. Questions for Ms. Fauski or Mr. Gabois? Otherwise, do you want Mr. Gabois to go through the professional service agreement, or would you like him to bring it back for the September 21st meeting and approve the wetland delineation now, which is on Hardscrabble? Aren't there wetlands though on Stonebridge, along Stonebridge?
Yes, Madam Mayor, there's a retention pond on the south side of Stonebridge that we'll also be looking at. So if there's mentions to the wetland delineation only being on Hardscrabble, that's inaccurate. It's going to be for the project area, and that's what the proposal includes. So that's
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, both Hardscrabble and Stonebridge. Great.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, Council, what is your pleasure? The only reason I'm asking is yeah. Go ahead.
I guess I prefer just to do the wetland delineation and have the professional services agreement be for all the entire project. Just so we have one document to refer to. It's just less confusing in the future when we have to deal with it. I think that makes sense just to do the wetland delineation now.
Mr. Trumperlin, what's your?
This is John T. I would definitely agree with Ms. Bruce to do the wetlands now, bring back the request for the professional services with all 4 streets in it.
All right. that kind of the general consensus? I would agree with that. Mr. Molitor, are you okay with that?
That's fine.
All right. And Ms. Mortensen?
That's fine.
All right. So the reason I'm asking is maybe Mr. Grabois, you don't have to go through the whole professional service agreement, and we can. So let me ask you, Ms. Falsky or Mr. Grabois, how can we approve the wetland? Do we just state the wetland delineation that we're? Give me some wording, or give us some wording for a resolution for a motion.
Sure, I can take that one, Madam Mayor. I think we can defer to Chris and Ron too on how we can adjust here the recommended city council action. But if we can take out all the language that says preliminary design, preparation of feasibility report, plans, specifications, bidding, and professional services, and just replace that with wetland delineation for the 2021 street improvement project and make that motion, then I think that would be fine by us. I mean, we'll just need your direction, and we can get our crews out there within a week. So.
Okay. Mr. Beatty, is that sufficient enough then?
Madam Mayor, Council, yes, it is.
All right, thank you. So Council, we need a motion to approve the wetland delineation by WSB for a 2021 street improvement project. Is there a motion to that effect?
Do we have to put the amount in the motion?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, let's do the motion real quick, and then we'll ask if we can talk about how much it is. Well, let me ask you this, Mr. Gabois, what is the amount that you had? I don't have the page number. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah,
it's on page. Sorry.
That's okay, Madam Bruce. It's Mrs. Bruce. It's page 103 of the full document for tonight, and the wetland delineation is estimated at
$61.32. Yeah.
$132.
Okay. All right. You can add that into the motion as well. So the motion would be authorizing WSB to do the wetland delineation in the amount of $6,132 for the 2021 street improvement projects, which include hardscrabble, flooring, and stone bridge, assuming there are none for Minneapolis Avenue. Is there a motion to that effect?
Madam Mayor, would it proper verbiage be not to exceed 6,132?
You can add that in if you'd like to make that motion.
I believe that fits what the normal verbiage is on the work being done. So let's put that in.
Right. All right. So, Mr. Chumperland, are you making that motion?
So moved.
All right. Is there? So, Mr. Chumperland made a motion that that WSB conduct the wetland delineation for the 2021 street improvement projects not to exceed the amount of $6,132. Is there a second to that motion?
This is Shannon. I'll second.
All right. The motion has been made and seconded. Any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, then all those in favor signify with aye. Mr. Chumperland.
Aye.
Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Lisa Whalen, motion passes 5-0. So we will look forward to the professional service agreement to come back on the 21st, including Minneapolis Avenue. All right. So we'll move on to our next. Next, we have item number C, and that's CARES funding update. So, Mr. Baroni?
Yes, Madam Mayor and City Council. Tonight on the telephone, we have two of the attorneys from Kennedy and Graven, Ron Beatty, of course, and also Joe Sathy. Joe is, I would call, the CARES Act guru for Kennedy and Graven. When this whole thing started, Joe was asked by that firm to kind of be the go-to person for that. And so not trying to oversell him, but he's been working on this all along. And so just before I turn it over to those two gentlemen, I would just want to reiterate what the mayor said a few minutes ago about, we've had, I read the one request from the food, or from the, from the West Tonka Food Shelf, and then Mayor talked about the request to speak by Colin Charlson and Kevin Borg, and also that what came up at our last meeting, I think we had a verbal solicitation from WeCan. There's a lot of ways to spend this money, and I think it's at the start of this, I said we've got 5 different council members. There's probably 5 different ideas on how to spend it. But tonight, we really are not asking you for a decision. This has been kind of a long, drawn-out process. I don't think it's really been any fault of anybody's. It's just kind of the way it is. Nobody's really gone through a pandemic before, so there's not a lot of experience to fall back on. But like I said, we don't need a decision tonight, but essentially with one caveat though, and I'll talk about that when we get to the end of the discussion, if it doesn't come up during the discussion. So with that, I'll let Mr. Beatty and then Mr. Sathi talk about the memo that they provided for council in the packet that we're going to talk about tonight. So Ron and Joe.
Madam Mayor, Council, this is Ron Beatty. I'll start off briefly. I think Mike has done a good job of introducing Joe. I've relied on him, and other attorneys in our office have come to rely on him as well with regard to this matter, which is pretty complicated and lots of moving parts. And so we've appreciated his work to date. The memo that Joe put together that's in your packet is a combination of a repeat of some of the things that we've talked about now for several meetings, general discussion about CARES funding and the rules for its expenditure. But at the last meeting, you also raised a number of specific proposals or possible expenditures and asked us to take a look at those. And so what we've done in the memo is examine those specifically with regard to the rules for CARES expenditure. Additional matter did come up tonight, and so that Mike mentioned during persons to be heard. That's not included in the memo, obviously, but that's something that we can comment, or that Joe can comment on as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joe and let him walk through his memo, and then he's available for questions.
Thank you very much, Ron and Mike, for that introduction. Madam Mayor, members of the council, as you see, I'm Joe Sathi, and as you can see in the memo, I thought it would just be helpful to sort of provide the general overview and basis for our discussion tonight about what CARES Act funds can be used for. And as I'm sure everybody's heard over and over, there's the 3-part test, which is really the base for building off how cities can spend this appropriation. And test 1 is that it must be reasonably necessary for its intended purpose, and that purpose must be to respond to this version of the COVID-19 pandemic, the one that's occurring right now. The second step is that it cannot have been accounted for in the budget on March 27th of this year, which was the day the CARES Act passed at the federal level, and that is accomplished in 2 ways. Either explicitly, the expenditure cannot be made with a line item that's included in the budget, or something is being used for a substantially different purpose, a substantially different use. And the Department of the Treasury, who has been putting out guidance documents, updated their guidance on the 2nd of September last week, and explicitly said that they have not, and will not define substantially dedicated, because there wasn't a precise way to do so across all of the different employment types that these funds are meant to cover. So that is, a frustrating area of discretion that lots of our clients and lots of cities and government entities are are dealing with when looking at spending these funds. The third step is that it must be incurred, according to the CARES Act language explicitly, between March 1st and December 30th of this year. However, for cities, it's a little bit different because when cities received the funds from the state, they signed a certification form which provided that the funds would be spent by November 15th or returned to the county. And if you're in Hennepin County or Ramsey County, it goes to the appropriate hospital. Or if you're not in Hennepin County or Ramsey County, it goes to just back to the county government. So as Ron had mentioned, we looked at this memo on a number of sort of specific things that had been requested to look at. And those were broadband expansion, these internal IT or technology expenses, providing funds to We Can, supporting schools, and then as the League of Minnesota Cities described it, the hottest topic, public safety costs, because, until last week, it was the only quote unquote presumption included in all these guidance documents. So as the memo outlines, each of the expenses we talk about, each of these steps. So for broadband expansion, the expense, as it says, could be considered to be due to the pandemic. So it likely could meet the first test. However, as mentioned, there are some practical implications, such as that the funds must be expended and work completed by November 15th. And any funds expended on such a project would have to significantly expand access to broadband during this pandemic. For the internal IT tech improvements, these are also one of the types of expenses that are explicitly addressed in the Department of the Treasury's guidance. Again, there has to be an assessment of need. One of the examples is that you can't simply say everybody at the city is going to be provided with $400 to purchase a computer to work at home. There has to be some sort of determination that the job duties require this type of technology at home, and that the individual doesn't already have such technology provided by the city. And again, the funds would have to be expended by November 15th. Getting into the other sort of support-related programs, we've seen a number of cities support nonprofits and support members of the community through providing funds to nonprofits. So if the city were to establish a program which provided aid to individuals impacted by COVID-19, that would generally be considered an eligible expense, assuming the program was established properly with the proper protocols. And we've been advising, as I mentioned in the memo, there is a little bit of a gray area right now about whether or not this November 15th deadline does in fact apply to grantees. This is because in the certification document that was signed by the city to receive funds, that document only talks about cities. So some have been arguing that grantees may spend the funds past November 15th, but there's some real practical implications about sort of reporting and tracking. And a lot of the funds can be used to reimburse expenses back until March 1st. So the easiest way, and what we've really been advising, is have all of the city's expenses and grantee expenses wrapped up by November 15th, so that the procedures for returning the funds, reporting the funds are really streamlined and wrapped up by that date, especially because if funds are deemed to have been misspent, the Department of the Treasury would come after the city, and the city It would not go after the grantee, a nonprofit, a business who received a grant. The city is ultimately responsible for how those funds are spent. So, there are a lot of good programs that can be done and a lot of expenses that are eligible that can be reimbursed prior to November 15th. As it relates to schools are a little bit tricky. As I've noted in the memo, schools received a significant amount of funding from the state. And my understanding of that funding is that it is also CARES Act dollars. The state received a lump sum from the federal government, and a certain amount was appropriated to school districts. So one of the requirements of the CARES Act is that there be assurances, or the requirement is that funds can't be used to cover the same expense. So the city, were to support the school, there would have to be sort of proof that there are eligible expenses above and beyond they already are reimbursed for from their federal CARES Act appropriation that came through the state and the Department of Education. And again, those funds we're advising, because they would technically be considered a grant from the city, that they would also wrap up by November 15th. And I believe that the additional item that was added or discussed today was the West Tonka food shelf. And as I mentioned with other items, we've seen a number of cities address this in some different ways. If the city were to decide to not use CARES Act funds to support a food shelf, there is a statutory provision which allows the city to make a donation to a food shelf. But those funds generally would have to come from the city's general revenue, because there's a question about whether simply buying food for a food shelf is CARES Act eligible, because it might not meet the requirements of that it is assisting individuals directly impacted by COVID-19. So there are other ways, you can support a food shelf potentially through an operating grant if they can show that they've been negatively impacted by COVID, similar to a business assistance grant. But those are some things that would have to be discussed with a food shelf, especially since it's my understanding that a number of the larger established food shelves are receiving CARES Act funds from multiple sources. So again, the same problem with the city or with the school districts, where there have to be some type of mechanism or assurance that the food shelf or whatever nonprofit it is making sure that they're following all the CARES Act guidance and funds are only being spent to reimburse single costs. So that leaves us with the public safety expenditures for the CARES Act. And really the main thing the biggest point of discussion with most cities is this language around the presumption. So the presumption is that the duties of public safety employees have substantially changed due to COVID-19. So that is, public safety employees are doing different duties that were not budgeted for in the last budget, whether that be, enforcing stay-at-home orders, social distancing requirements, those types of things. Those are the main items that we've seen as justification, at which at some level, if the determination is made that an employee is substantially dedicated to responding to COVID-19, you can reimburse all of their salary and benefits. And the other way to do it is you track specific time by certain employees. So if there was a decision that, Joe, my time isn't wholly dedicated to responding to COVID, which at this point, this week has been. But usually, I would just track my time and say, this thing that I did is related to COVID. We track it, we add it up at the end, and then you can bill that back against the CARES Act dollars. So those are the two ways that sort of the public safety spending can be reimbursed back to the city. And those funds must also be for services incurred up until November 15th. And there are two exceptions to this November 15th deadline, which are one, payroll for incurred up until the 15th that's normally paid out after the 15th. So, a public safety employee who works on the 15th, their pay and benefits for that day would be included, even if they're paid on December or November, the end of November. The other exception is if something is ordered, paid for, or ordered with the intent of having it be delivered before November 15th, but due to a quote unquote supply chain disruption is delayed until after November 15th. So those are the two exceptions to the November 15th deadline for city expenses. So, generally, as I said at the beginning, the things you really have to look for with these types of expenses when they're not eligible are if they meet the three tests, and then, as I'm sure everyone has seen, there's a non-exclusive list of eligible expenses, and then a non-exclusive list of ineligible expenses, which everybody is using to compare against the things they want reimbursed. But really, again, it comes back down to those three tests for all of this stuff.
Okay.
And
yep.
So if anybody has any questions, as Ron said, I'm here to answer questions, or if there's something else you'd like me to talk about related to this, I'm happy to further discuss any of these items.
So I just have a question, then I'm going to hand it over to the rest of the council. I'm sure they have questions as well. So in the past, Mr. Beatty has told us that there's these the tests, reasonable, necessary to respond to COVID, etc., except that there's a presumption that public safety has to respond, so therefore they don't have to meet that test. Is that your interpretation as well?
So I think it's maybe a distinction without a difference. It's the presumption is that they do meet that test already. That by the nature of these new duties, they meet that test.
Okay, so that's the presumption.
Yes.
Whether they. Okay. All right. I'm sure council has a lot of questions. Council, questions?
This is Shannon. I have a question, and it relates to the food shelf request. You mentioned that there's difficulty using these funds because they can't because of paying duplicative things that have already been covered. And my question is, could the food shelf was requesting freezers and refrigerators. If they were to take the difference between their food outlay for 2019 from March through November, which is the pandemic period, March through November, but from 2019 for that period, and take the difference between the 2020 food outlays for March through November of 2020, wouldn't that show an increased need and show that the freezers and refrigerators were needed to accommodate the COVID-19 need? Could you justify that?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, that's a really good question, and I think that that's exactly how you would do it for if this was a business, a for-profit business. It is that they can continue to operate only if these funds are received, and they have these funds because of COVID-19. The difference with a food shelf in particular is that food generally isn't eligible under the CARES Act. And so there would have to be some, this would be something that the city would have to determine they're comfortable with, which is that the increase is one absolutely due to COVID-19. It benefits individuals impacted by COVID-19. And usually that requirement is that, each individual who receives assistance has been impacted by COVID-19. There's a question of whether or not an expense like you've described, the food shelf has described, meets that criteria. But there's an argument to be made that it could be eligible. But again, if the federal government were to come back and say that was not in line with the guidance because there wasn't an assessment of need for the individuals who receive the funds or receive the assistance, and therefore it was misspent, the city would be responsible for those funds if that's what they were to do.
Joe, this is Ron Beatty. You probably were not on the call earlier when Mike Baroni read the request from these folks, but they were specifically requesting money for capital things, freezers and refrigerators. So I don't know if that changes your answer or your thinking about it. I just want to make sure that you understood that's what they were requesting.
No, it's that. I think.
So in other words, let me just weigh in here a little bit here. They were requesting freezers. They need additional freezers and refrigerators because they have additional needs that they feel are related to COVID-19. Maybe that clarifies it a little bit better.
Yeah, that does a little. Yes, that does. I think that if the city decides that they want to, if you as the council decide that expense is reasonably necessary to assist to help the food shelf be able to operate, and we treat it as a business operating loan instead of assistance to individuals, I think that could be considered an eligible expense. I will say that I have not seen that type of expense argued for this evening. But I think that an argument, I think that it could be considered to be eligible.
Okay.
I think that, on a practical level, those are the types of expenses, saying that, it was for a new refrigerator. I think if it was for an additional refrigerator, that is a better argument than if it was replacing their old refrigerators and it didn't, significantly, really increase the capacity to provide. And I think if the food shelf can show increased, there's a whole increase because of COVID-19, and even better if they can say, we understand that, now 25% of the people who come in, I'm just making this hypothetical up. If they can say 25% of the people who come in now are here because they've lost their jobs due to COVID, they have income loss due to COVID. We need to be able to provide this service to be able to operate as a business, quote unquote. Then there's a stronger argument that would be an eligible expense.
Okay. All right. Council, other questions?
I have another question. This is Shannon.
Yeah.
It says that the league is encouraging cities to document the reasons the expenses were determined to satisfy the three-part test. And those findings can be used later to explain decisions if we get audited. And so I guess my question is, if we were considering public safety costs, I would think that we would need to have public safety personnel document how many hours they actually had their time repurposed substantially to COVID-19 activities. I think is that what you're seeing other cities do?
That's Madam Mayor, members of the council, it's a really good question. There are two ways that other cities have been doing public safety costs, and usually it's a hybrid model. It is if a certain public safety employees' duties are substantially dedicated, and that's a determination by the city that their duties, they're having new duties, that's sort of a substantial part of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, that employee's entire salary and benefits could be reimbursed through CARES Act dollars. There are other public safety employees who may not have duties that are responding to COVID-19, and for those employees, we would assume that maybe the presumption, it's a little weaker that the presumption applies. And so then documenting. That's the hours breakdown. So for the first employee, the substantially dedicated employee that meets the presumption, there still needs to be some type of, determination narrative that, this employee's duties are substantially dedicated to COVID-19 because they are now doing X, Y, Z that we did not anticipate them doing on March 27th, and X, Y, and Z are directly related to COVID. And just for an auditor, my understanding is, my dad's an accountant, not me, but my understanding is the legal justification for that, specifically for the auditor, is they're still going to want to see some type of documentation about why these funds were used for public safety. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And you also said that they don't have a definition for, they say they're not going to provide a definition for the word substantially, but there is a definition for the word substantially, and that it means for the most part. And I think that's pretty common knowledge. Do you see that word substantially being something different than like the dictionary definition of for the most part?
Well, I've seen other interpretations that it's a substantial part. It is a significant part of what they're doing. I think that there are obvious examples of substantial being a majority, but they are different words for different reasons, and there are nuances for each word, both in sort of general parlance and for legal purposes. And the fact that the Treasury Department has specifically stated now that they are not going to define the phrase substantially dedicated makes it so there is more. There's a stronger argument that cities need to be comfortable with the level of dedication to COVID-19 when addressing this presumption.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, this is Ron. Speaking of that, I think what we've talked about before, and I'd like you to comment, is that ultimately, don't you think it's up to each city to make that determination?
Yes, absolutely. And each city is impacted differently by COVID, and it's up to each city to determine how much they've been impacted to decide whether or not, there are cities that will say every single public and safety employee, their duties are now substantially dedicated to responding to COVID-19 and will blanket submit all of the funds, simply use all of their CARES Act funds in reimbursing their own public safety expenses. And, what we have advised is really to look at if the presumption applies to all employees. Generally we see that, generally I've seen that, a number of employees have been determined to be substantially dedicated. And then it's sort of after you take off the low-hanging fruit of the people who absolutely have their duties responding to COVID-19, then the sort of responsible thing is to look at the hourly or time or percentage dedication to COVID-19 expenses.
This is Pam, and maybe being directed to Paul Falls. Paul, are you gathering that information? Because I think we talked about this at the last or two council meetings before. Because your job in particular probably has changed a lot more than others. Are you going to have that information together in the near future so that we can look at where do we stand with those costs?
Mayor and Council, that's a great question, and I think some of the frustration amongst the
Oops.
We lost
Paul,
you,
you're
Paul.
muted.
Paul,
Unmute,
we
Paul.
lost you.
Oh, am I there now?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry about that. So I think some of the frustration amongst the council and staff alike has been all along, it's very difficult to gather specific information when nobody will define exactly what it is we're talking about. With that said, certainly I can generalize some things. I don't think anyone would argue that my job has been substantially dedicated to COVID-19 since March, because I'm also the emergency management director. And so my duties have slipped more into that role than the police chief since that time. So I think that's an easy one. This is a conversation I've had with a number of chiefs in the Lake area community since this started. And there isn't necessarily a consensus. I know some cities have already submitted under the presumption and they're comfortable doing that, and others are not, and that's okay. I think what we're trying to determine is, I don't know that necessarily my secretarial staff or the community service officers would apply, but I think I could make a pretty strong argument for the police officers, and the question would be then, is it 100% of their time, or is it maybe an hour of each shift? Because a lot of things have changed, but I'd have to find a way to quantify that once we can determine exactly what substantially dedicated is. So, I guess
Paul, yeah. Paul, what I was gonna
go ahead.
No, what I was gonna suggest is, again, we don't need to make any decisions tonight. However, it would be really good if next meeting, we could have a real list with dollar amounts attached to it as to what the city's expenses have been to date, and maybe even what we anticipate going forward up through November 15th, particularly with the, as you said, articulating, if you can, the public safety aspect of it. One of the things that would help us with then is, I mean, and again, we can talk about that you can be real broad or you can be real detailed, but then that would also give us a better idea as to what funds are still available to give to other entities should we be able to do that.
Sure.
Because I think Mr. Molitor said, and I agree with him, it would be a shame to have these funds go back to the county where they are not benefiting our community. And I'd like to see as many of these dollars remain in our community, benefiting our community in one way or the other, whether it's food shelf, weekend, school, public safety, whatever it might be. But I really think it's important that we try and make these dollars benefit our community as best as possible.
Sure. With that said, I'll be happy to work with Mr. Grimm and come up with some ballpark numbers and then justification for how we came to that as a talking point, and then wait for further direction from the council, because ultimately you'll have to be comfortable with whatever you decide.
Right.
And
Okay.
Mayor and Council, if I could piggyback, you kind of opened the door here, Mayor, and it was one of the points I was going to talk about under when we got to the end of this discussion, but as long as it's out there, I think I'll talk about it now. So one of the things that I would like to do for the upcoming council meeting on September 21 is to tackle the low-hanging fruit, as I'm calling it, which is all the PPE costs related to procuring and erecting the plexiglass, things of that nature. And also, it doesn't seem to be a lot of controversy amongst our council members about Mr. Falls's, Chief Falls's work being substantially dedicated to dealing with COVID since the start of it. So with those things in mind, we were hoping to discuss that at the end. I was going to hope to discuss that at the end, but if council is okay with that, we can bring something to the council at the next meeting that would document those dollars going forward. Those would be spent on city only related items. All the rest of the stuff we can talk about here in a few minutes, but if the council's okay with that, we can certainly, and the only reason I'm bringing it up, we have 2 meetings in September. We have not filed a report with MMB yet. We've just been filing 0 reports, which we're required to do, but this would be our first essentially withdrawal from the money, so to speak. So that would occur the first week or so of October, and the next time to do that, not tonight, is the 21st of September. So,
right. Well, that's why I was also saying if Paul can put together some numbers too that are substantiated, then we can look at those as well.
Right.
Besides just Paul's time, but okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah. Council, are you okay with that?
I'd like to just make. Go ahead.
Hold on.
This is Councilmember Molitor. One question I have for the attorneys on the line is under public safety, they say payroll expenses. From a finance background, I look at payroll expenses more than just the salary dollars. I look at payroll expenses as the employer side of the FICA tax. I also look at healthcare insurance, a PTO expense. Is that your understanding as well in payroll costs, or are they talking just about salary dollars?
This is Madam Mayor, members of the council. This is Joe Sethi. The updated federal guidance provides a list of covered benefits that include leave, employee insurance, retirement, unemployment benefit plans, workers' compensation, federal or FICA taxes, which include Social Security and Medicare.
Okay, thank you. So to the point about Paul working with Brian, and Brian specifically to you, I want to make sure that we've got that included in the numbers. Also with things such as installing the plexiglass at City Hall. I know I've seen numbers come across on the registers for the glass itself, but I'd also want to make sure that we do the same thing with, I believe Gary put those up, to make sure we've got, time allotted for him as well as his payroll expenses as we've just defined.
agreed.
Yes, good point. Mm-hmm.
That's going to be substantially more than just payroll, or just salary dollars, I should say.
Correct.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Anybody else? Questions, comments? In answer to
Shannon
Mr.
again.
Baroni's question? Yep.
Yes, this is Shannon, and I'm wondering if it might make sense to have the council come to some agreement on what the term substantially dedicated means, to give direction to Chief Falls, because he expressed how difficult it is when he doesn't know what that is supposed to mean. And if we could decide, because ultimately it's our decision, because the council is going to be authorizing the funds going out for these purposes or not, it's our responsibility to authorize it. So I think coming to an agreement on what substantially dedicated to us means, and does that mean for the most part the majority, or is the council comfortable with saying that, giving it some other definition? I mean, that's what it means to me, is for the most part and the majority of your time. That's what it means to me, and I just like to hear the other council members chime in on that.
This is John P. I want to get past this quote substantially word, and I know it's there, but the Treasury Department is, in my understanding, has signed off when it comes to the work for public for the police or for public safety. They've agreed that for administrative ease, that they are presumed to be substantially dedicated. So I don't know if we need to try to jump in there to further define that word. So first of all, I'm forgetting that word when we're talking about public safety. It means nothing because Treasury has overridden it, has basically said forget it. Now, I do agree that it's not carte blanche just to say, well, they're public safety, so they're out there and they're doing all this COVID stuff. However, certainly Chief Falls' job, in my opinion, has changed because of meetings, conversations, his title. Now, when we get down to sergeant, lieutenants, everybody else, now to me it's a little grayer. However, if Chief Falls says we're having weekly meetings that are dedicated to that, anything that is being done that is dedicated to that, that's something that was not being done in January, February, or last year at this time, then I think we're down to talking hourly. And if Chief Falls substantiates that we've got 13 and every week we're having an hour meeting on it, there's 13 hours there times how many weeks, that's the way I would look at it from an accounting standpoint. But again, I'm back to forget the word substantially if we're talking about public safety. That's my only comment.
And I guess this question is for Joe or Mr. Safety. Ultimately, isn't it the council that decides whether the presumption applies or not? It's not the MMB. It's the council that decides whether that presumption applies. And I think that's why that substantially dedicated is important, because as a council member, we're determining whether that presumption applies to Chief Falls and his time.
So it is that the council has to, in the scenarios, the council would present specific facts that rebut the presumption. If we're getting technical, that would be the determination that there are specific facts that show that the duties of the public safety employees in question, are not, again, to use the term that no one likes, substantially dedicated to responding to COVID-19.
Joe, this is Ron. Maybe this is what you just said. I mean, the way I read it is that there is a presumption. Presumptions are rebuttable, but it's a thumb on the scale. And the way the final provision in that is, unless the chief administrative officer determines that the presumption doesn't apply. So, I mean, I see it as the presumption does apply unless there are specific situations in which we think facts argue against it. I mean, can you comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And an example could be if there was maybe in a much larger police department or public safety division where there was an employee who never dealt with anything related to COVID, was not supporting anybody ever related to COVID. Those might be specific facts which would rebut the presumption. Or if there was potentially a city or a township in outstate greater Minnesota which has no confirmed cases, they have none of the police, the public safety employees are not even considering addressing any of the COVID-19 precautions for their own purposes. Those are two examples of very, again, low-hanging fruit of examples of facts that would rebut such a presumption.
Okay, thank you. Council, any other questions? Again, we don't have to make a decision tonight, but obviously with Mr. Saby here, good time to ask questions. So Are there any others? Okay. So with that, then,
Mayor and Council, I'd like to chime in. I said at the start when I introduced the two attorneys that I'd like to. I had one caveat that related to not having to make a decision tonight, and I just want to talk a little bit about that. So, one of the things that I think our council eventually is going to have to decide is, do we want to keep all this money for ourselves? Do we want to dedicate it to whether it's police or any other area? Or do we want to invite or ask agencies, such as we've heard tonight from the West Tonka Food Shelf, previous verbal ask from WeCan, an upcoming ask that we're going to hear from West Tonka School District? Do we want to, potentially provide money, COVID money that we got to them, assuming that they meet all the criteria and they can deliver on whatever it is that's listed there that's part of the COVID agreements that we sign off on. So the reason I'm asking that is, if that's the case, if we are interested in possibly discussing other agencies besides the city, we would probably have to have some sort of form or contractual agreement with any of those organizations or agencies that says, here's how we're going to spend the money, here's how much we need, here's why, here's how it benefits Minnetrista residents, and here's how it relates to COVID. If that's the case, I assumed it would be that I asked Mr. Beatty and Mr. Sethi a week ago is if they had any sort of template or boilerplate agreement that they could provide for us so we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think they said they could. So kind of interested in finding out if we're going to share the dough or if we're going to keep it all ourselves. And if we are going to share it with some outside agencies, obviously we need to make them jump through some hoops in order to document the money that they're going to use is for the right purposes, because as Mr. Sethi said, it's ultimately on us as the city responsible for that.
Well, I'd like to hear, and I'm sure that the rest of the council has questions too of the school district or of Colin Charles' request. And I can't say tonight that any of us are prepared to say yay or nay. We had a specific request from the food shelf for additional freezers. We may need some more information on that. We haven't really had a lot of information from WeCan. They kind of asked for some funding, and that would have to be vetted out too in terms of what are they asking for, what is it for, how does it relate to COVID. Until we know those answers, I don't know. I wouldn't be prepared to make any determination tonight.
Right,
but the rest of the
and the catch-22 of that, Mayor, is as follows. So we've been saying all along that, assuming that we're going to spend the money on city-related things, that we would be able to document that stuff before the November 15th deadline. So when you say, we have some time, but essentially we kind of don't have some time. So if we were going to have, I'll just use the food shelf request. If we were going to give any money, they asked for 48,000. Even if we give them 5,000, I have no idea what the amount might be. That'll be a council decision. Let's say we gave them 48,000, and they're going to have to, if we deem it's okay, they're going to have to go out and buy those freezers and refrigerators and have them delivered and on site before November 15th. So if they can't do that, then they can't have the money. So,
right, and that's the question I would have to ask them. I think that's one of the questions we'd have to ask and find out.
Correct.
And and you're right, if they can't, it's totally off the table. If they can, it might be a consideration.
Correct.
Right. I don't know. I'm just, yeah.
So I don't know if Ron or Joe want to chime in on that, but that's my take on it, is that including us, anybody we give the money to, they got to be done with it and have the stuff in hand, so to speak, by the November 15th deadline. So.
Right.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, this is Ron. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. the way I've kind of come to think about these is dividing expenses into things that you've already, expenses that you've already incurred, and you will simply be trying to reimburse yourself for, or things that you have not yet bought and that you'll have to buy in the future. And when I say you, I mean either the city or another party, because that deadline that Joe mentioned that has come up a couple of times, November 15th applies to both the city and anybody that we might want to give money to. So that if the city were going to go out and buy new computers or something like that, we'd have to do that within that period of time. And as Mike is saying right now, if we're going to give money to anybody else, then they too have to spend it within that period of time. And of course, the later we give them the money, the less time they have. Compare that to, for example, reimbursing ourselves for the police. Those costs have been already incurred ever since March 1st, or anything else that we might do. So those are easier to deal with. Just, conceptually, that's how I've kind of divided it. As several people have said, if we do end up giving money to any other entities, we have developed a relatively simple agreement that we would recommend the city enter into, because, as Joe said, if there's any problems with the expenditures of the money, they're going to come looking to us, not to the sub-grant recipients. And so, Joe, you might want to describe just very briefly what would be in such an agreement.
Yeah, no, absolutely no problem. The agreements that we've developed, I would describe them as there being two different types. There's the first type of agreement, which is just a grant agreement, which says that the city agrees to provide these funds to the grantee, designate them as the CARES Act funds, and require the entity receiving them, the grantee, to follow CARES Act guidance. And then the agreements usually say these are eligible expenses. This is the date by which you need to return unspent funds. The entity is responsible for unspent funds. And those are the major provisions, is just providing that the entity gets X number of dollars. They're certifying that they're going to spend it on eligible expenses. They're going to return any unspent funds they have if you choose to proceed without a sole reimbursement program, and that they're responsible for misspent funds. And they're pretty, as it comes to grant agreements, they're pretty simple, because there are, just as we've talked about, the limited number of eligible expenses under the CARES Act. The second kind, which is potential, my understanding is this is not what is being requested by any of the entities, except for potentially we can. The second type is essentially having the city establish a type of assistance program, which then is administered by the nonprofit. And that, again, is a pretty simple agreement that basically stipulates the same thing, except instead of a grant, it's a professional services agreement to have the nonprofit administer an aid program using CARES Act dollars.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Mr. Baroni, what are you saying, that we need to make a decision tonight? I mean, it doesn't seem like we really can.
No, like I said, it's kind of a catch-22, Mayor. So I'm not asking you to, the only thing I'm really asking you to decide tonight is, would you consider using some of the money that the city of Minnetrista has received from the CARES Act for other organization or entities, such as the ones you all know about? Is that a consideration? Okay. Or do you just want to keep it all ourselves and, say sorry, Charlie, to anybody that might ask? So,
okay.
That's kind of, I kind of think I know the answer, but I just wanted to make sure that it was out there for the council members to understand that it's a lot simpler if we don't give it out, but it might look bad upon the city if we don't want to share our money, especially if they're valid requests.
Okay, so council, where do you stand on this? Kind of give me a some feedback? Mr. Brony, some feedback?
This is Shannon. I would like to consider a program for organizations like the Food Shelf, and we haven't heard from the schools yet either. I'd like to understand what they're asking too. So I don't know if that helps you or not.
No, I think it does.
Well,
I mean, you're commenting on the only real concrete requests that we have right now, and it makes sense to, even though it shortens the time frame to spend the money, but we haven't been able to get people from the school district here. They should be at the next meeting, as the mayor mentioned earlier. And we've got nothing in writing, so I don't know if we could reach out to Weekend and say, if you do want something, you need to let us know, and then we can follow up with a form as Mr. Sathi spoke about. So.
Right. So, rest of the council, are you okay with that?
This is Councilmember Molitor.
Molitor, go ahead.
Yes, I am not comfortable with that. This goes back to the fundamental role of what the city government does. We are not a charity. We are not in the business of doling out funds and determining who the winner is and who the loser is. It's one thing if it were money that we had no strings attached, but this is kind of a double down risk that if we start giving out money to other organizations and it's deemed that it's not appropriate, we're on the hook for that. And that means the taxpayers of Minnetrista are on the hook for that. That's a big difference. And it gets, especially when we have public safety costs that we know are eligible, that I'm not comfortable with starting to operate as a charity. That's not what we do. That's not our job. And I know that seems harsh, but the other organizations have other funds to draw upon. The school district has a much larger budget than the city does. It seems rather odd to me that with a larger entity coming to a smaller entity for funding, that should be the other way around. This is wrong, and I don't think that's what we're here for. And it's bad precedent, and hopefully we won't get into that part of it. But I don't feel that's our role. And furthermore, then if we do start going down this path, then we do have to start picking winners and losers and how much. And it's a no-win proposition. And I really have a problem with that. That's not, especially for an organization where none of the money has been even spent yet. How can you tell me that, we need a new refrigerator for COVID-19 and we haven't even bought it, and here it is September 8th and we're 5 months into the pandemic? No, that's you're making the stuff up to buy something that you might want in the future. That's not an expense that's already been incurred. It's to Mr. Beatty's point. Public safety expense has already been incurred. This is a wish list that is not even been incurred. And so, no, I have a real problem with that. I will not support that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Mr. Chamberlain?
I would just about second what Mr. Molitor said with a caveat. I would like to see what we feel our in-house costs are, what that we as a council are comfortable with. Obviously, the masks and the outfitting, the lobby, those are all, as we said earlier, slam dunks. However, we get into the salaries. I'd like numbers at the next meeting that we are comfortable with to project out where are we at out of $500,000+ or we're we only talking $250,000. If we've got $300,000 left, what are we going to do with it? We don't want to send it back. So the caveat I got there is then yes, maybe we do grants, but you do run into the issue Mr. Molitor's touching on. Who's the winners? Who's the losers? Can they substantiate that the money would be used properly? Because if it's not, it's coming back to us that we have to return it. So first us, then if necessary, others.
Okay. Ms. Mortensen?
I agree. I think it's really important that we gather the information up that we have spent in-house and nickel and dime it. I mean, look for anything and everything that we could possibly apply as an expense and to get that information together. And then Mike has a really good, and John, valid points of, the expenses already incurred is really important. Some of these are asking for things, and we're already hopefully on the downturn of this whole coronavirus, and now we're asking for additional freezings and so forth. So I question that, but yet I don't want to give the money back to the county, to the hospital. I'd like to keep it here. So it's really hard. I'd like to maybe even see some kind of a contract asking these organizations that is a possibility. We're looking at this. Could you send us what you are looking at spending this money on, or what do you need, and what would this all entail? And then we can look at it as a council. It's going to take time for them to gather that information as well. So, we keep saying, we have time. We don't have time. This is coming down to the wire because we only have, how many more city council meetings? 4 at the most before November 15th, 5. We're coming down to the wire.
Well, and they have to have it spent before then too. So
yes.
I think we'd have to notify the people that have been in contact with the city and making these requests that when they, by next meeting, maybe on the 21st, they'd have to come with some really concrete numbers as well as proof, if you will, that it is needed for regarded because of COVID. So, all right. So I think everybody has some really good valid points. I don't think that decision is going to be made tonight. It sounds clear that we'd like to, find out the city's valid expenses first and see where we're at with that. And I think we'll carry this discussion forward to our September 21st meeting, and then hopefully we can make a decision at that time. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes.
All right.
The other thing,
right.
Going back to Mike Mulder's comment about not just being salaried, when I said nickel and dime, I'm talking about even like, Paul, when you go to a meeting, you drive to these meetings perhaps or whatever. You get how much? 56 cents a mile? That mileage adds up as well. Anything that you can think of that we can possibly add in, I would go for it.
Yeah. All right. Mr. Brony?
Yes, Mayor.
Do you have, are you clear?
I think I'm clear.
Okay. All right. All right. Yeah.
We'll do our best to bring something back and try to incorporate in exactly what it is that council has spoken about tonight. So the only other thing I wanted to mention tonight is before I think Joe leaves, because he's just going to participate in this part. Initially, we were going to try to get Bob Vose here tonight. Mr. Vose has a meeting on Monday nights and a meeting on Tuesday nights, first and second Mondays. Plus, like us, there's another city that's first and third. So just like us, whatever city that was, I believe it was Belle Plaine, moved their Monday meeting to Tuesday, which is tonight. So he was double booked tonight, and he was not able to squeeze us in. He would have been triple booked if he could have agreed to participate with us tonight. So he did not have the ability to participate. So we will have him here at the on the phone call on the September 21st council meeting. He'll only be double booked that night, but I think he said that he would be able to participate in our discussion, because I do want to further address some of the other questions that are, surrounding this. It has to do with the internet. I know we discussed it, how it relates to CARES, but this is going to be also more of a general discussion on the internet provisions that we get going. Yeah, exactly. So I wanted him to talk about that. Like I said, there's a tie-in with CARES, but not specifically tonight, but we'll try to make that on the 21st. So.
And the other thing too, I thought would be appropriate to have with that discussion is the contract that we have with MediaCom. If we could have that in our packet and have him touch on that as well.
Sure.
All right. Okay.
I think we've included that in the past, but we can certainly do it again.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So moving on, next we have our fire district concept discussion. So I'll hand it over to Mr. Baroni real quick here. Again, this isn't, we're not going to be making decisions as to what option we're going to do. It's basically what we're looking for is council approval, if you will, to continue with the talks that have started with St. Bonnie and Mound and the other cities that are involved in the fire areas of Mound and St. Bonnie. But I'll hand it, so just kind of wanting to give you an overview of what we're doing and kind of get your blessing on it, so to speak, to continue with those talks. Mr. Brony?
Yes, I'll try to make this brief. I mean, I know it's a long packet item. Majority of the stuff is information that we've received as part of the special committee that's working on this. So I just wanted you to see what we've seen. It's not all of it, but it's kind of the highlights. So I won't spend too much time, but I tried to go through some of the background information. So essentially over the years, the fire call volume has gone up in the country while volunteer firefighters have gone down. The more professional or permanent career firefighters have gone up. Specifically here in Minnesota, we have a pretty decent record of providing fire services at a pretty inexpensive cost. We rank 21st in the nation in population, but the cost of delivering fire services is only 48th, so we're well at the bottom. So it's pretty efficient. We've had a couple of different studies that have taken place over the years. They didn't cost the city either time. They were grants. We had one in 2011 that was performed by a group called ESCI. They got offices all over the country. They've been around since the 70s. They did a good job. One of the things they came up was trying to give us some low cost, low risk options to start out. The main one was to maybe hire between all the departments involved, and there were a lot of them. Doing some sort of training that never really did materialize because I think of the number of departments that we're dealing with. And then the McGrath Consulting Group was again hired through a grant, and a bunch of local departments participated, and they had a whole bunch of recommendations, again including the training thing, but that didn't make as much headway. But I think we've learned from those, and so recently in the last, and both Mayor Whalen and Councilmember Bruce can talk about this, we've been kind of touching on the concept of a fire district again. I think we're going to be able to hopefully get some traction by just focusing on both the Mound Fire Department and the St. Bonnie Fire Department, and then see where that goes, and then potentially branching out with adjacent fire district or fire departments if this proves successful. We've had 2 meetings, one on July 10th, one on August 7th, and I included some of the stuff that the 2 fire chiefs put together. There's some stuff, a list of advantages, a list of challenges, some summary comments. And so I guess the bottom line is what I'm trying to get from our council tonight is, are you okay with the city moving forward? The task with this group was to go back to your respective councils, find out if there's buy-in for councils and cities to move forward to continue this work, because we don't want to move forward if we're not going to please the council members in each city. So that's kind of where we're at. Are you okay with the concept of fire district and moving forward with that? And if so, we could certainly report back. Our next scheduled meeting is the 25th of September. It's after our second council meeting. I wanted to get it on this council meeting just to make it a discussion item, like I said, briefly, to find out where everybody's at. So I think it's a good idea. In my opinion, since being here, our city is growing. We're big participants in both fire departments that we contract with, both St. Bonnie and Mound. Both have been very good departments, and we're the driving force in the fire services because we're the city that's growing the fastest out of all 3 of these cities. I know Spring Park's in the Mound district as well, but we're the one that's providing all the growth. And I think we've done a pretty decent job with both departments on managing costs, but there's a lot of big ticket items that are going to have to be discussed with our two fire departments purchasing equipment. I just think the general trend in the country, maybe not as much here locally, but it's tending that way, is that we need to start looking at the future. This could be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and there's going to be a lot of work that goes into this, but just trying to get a flavor for what council members think about the idea of moving forward with a fire district concept. And
So
with that, I'll
just
take
kind
any
of
questions.
just kind of to piggyback on that. So the task force would be looking at pros and cons and what all we want to come of this. So that it's not just we're going to do this and we're going to come back and you have to approve it. That's not it. We really just don't want to spin our wheels if everybody is, nope, we don't want a fire district, absolutely not. That's kind of what we're asking tonight. This has been talked about for years, and there never was a lot of buy-in, I guess, by all parties involved. And now I think there's the atmosphere is, yes, let's talk about this. It might make sense, and especially when you look at the future of fire departments. So that's kind of what we're here tonight asking the council. Are you on board with continuing this discussion with the cities, or do you just want to say no?
This is Shannon. In discussions that I had with Chief Weber in St. Bonnie before Chief Anderson took over, it seemed to me like the administrative workload for establishing a fire district is the biggest hurdle, and I would like to see the talks go forward. I'd like to know what the pros and the cons are, but I'd like early on to identify what that administrative workload is going to look like, and is it going to require like an additional, like an FTE, a full-time employee, to actually take on that work. And the second question that I had is, I didn't see Excelsior or Shorewood included in this fire district. Are they not participating?
So no. So Excelsior, Shorewood have their own fire, if you will, district or whatever. Now Shorewood is just a very, very minor, small portion of the Mound fire area, and so their administrator sits in on those meetings. But it's primarily Spring Park, Mound, Minnetrista, and St. Bonnie. So kind of to answer your question, we talked about this at one of our Northwest League meetings regarding administrative costs to let's say create a district, and there are grants available. And if there's a substantial cost involved and or time involved, those kind of grants I would assume we would be seeking out those grants to help cover those costs. The state has money available to do just that, to try and create districts or change the way you do business for fire departments. With right now, the other discussion that we've had briefly is, we've talked about a fire district for many years, and it never has come to fruition. As Mr. Baroni just pointed out, there was Long Lake, I think Medina was even involved in it, but anyhow, there's Long Lake, Maple Plain, Mound, all kinds of people involved in this other thing that, and then, nothing happened. It just kind of fell by the wayside. And one of the reasons, I believe, is because there were too many cooks in the kitchen. So my idea was, hey, why don't we start out small? We have two really great fire departments here, and a couple of cities that are willing to work together and talk about it. Why don't we start out small? And if it comes to fruition with these two fire departments, then we can lean out and say, hey, are others interested in joining us? That's kind of the approach, because the other approach has never worked. It hasn't worked for years, and so we thought maybe a smaller approach might be a better approach.
That's exactly correct. It's not an unwillingness. It's just, as the mayor's pointed out, too many cooks in the kitchen. It's too unwieldy.
Yeah.
So we decided to start small, see what happens. It benefits us because we're part of both of those departments and no others. So
So would Excelsior Shorewood just not be a part of this, or would they continue using Mound Fire if it became a fire district?
Excelsior doesn't use Mound for their fire. Excelsior is part of the Excelsior Shorewood. There's a public safety department that encompasses, and maybe Paul, you would, Chief Falls, you would know, but it's Greenwood, Shorewood, Excelsior. It might be Minnetonka Beach. I'm not. There's a bunch of smaller communities that have banded together and created a joint. I think it's a joint powers. Chief, do you know?
Yes, Madam Mayor, the South Lake Minnetonka Police Department covers Shorewood, Greenwood, Tonka Bay, and Excelsior. And then the fire district, it is a fire district. It's the Excelsior Fire District. Covers all of those cities, and I believe Deep Haven and maybe a couple of others. So they already have a fire district in place there. The only portion of Shorewood that Mound covers is out on the island, which is obviously over in our neck of the woods. Other than that, it's all covered by Excelsior.
Okay, because they do send someone to the Mound Fire Commission meetings, and that was why I was questioning it.
Yeah, because
but that's fine. It sounds like it's insignificant.
Right. Yeah. It's like 2% of the area that Mound covers. Okay. All right. And Council, you want to weigh in or have questions?
This is Councilmember Molitor. I'm not entirely opposed to the idea. However, when I looked through the information, and this is my understanding from the past as well, the biggest issue that we have, well, first of all, I want to say, we have a great setup already, right? And it's reflected in what Mr. Brony was just saying. We have, the 48th least expensive fire system in the country. And when you look at the Mound and St. Bonnie, it's even better. I mean, the cost effectiveness of what we're doing right now really is phenomenal. And so I'm a little reluctant to, change that a whole lot, right? Because I mean, it works. It works it works effectively, and we have a real potential of quite frankly messing it up. I don't want to do that. But I do understand some of the comments about going forward. Again, as was cited in the packet, there's nationwide trends and this and that and the other thing, but that's all well and good. But I'm a little more concerned about what's happening right here, not overall nationwide. But when I look at that and I see that the issue primarily, as we probably all know, is attracting and retaining talent, right? And correct. I'm not so sure that the fire district is the best way to solve that, or the only way to solve that. It could be an option, but I guess I would be a little bit more interested in seeing if we can't directly address that issue first, without going down this whole big monster of trying to create a fire district. And I'm not entirely familiar with how the compensation structure works, but I'd be much more inclined to be open to, changing the compensation structure that might make it a little more attractive for people to want to volunteer their efforts, or not volunteer, but to join the fire department, if that's the issue we're trying to solve. And I think we can do that without creating a fire district. And so I guess I'd be more open to that idea. And I get it. The fire district can be a way to make that change in terms of compensation, but I don't think that has to be the driver. I really think that, if we really want to solve what we think might be a problem going forward, and that is not having enough firefighters, I think we can more directly address that by looking at the compensation model and tweaking that, and still having a very cost-effective and overall effective fire response team. So, you know, I'm not going to say I'm entirely against it, but I also can't give it a wholehearted blessing to go charging forward, because I really think it might be solving a problem that doesn't quite, we might be missing the mark in terms of what we're trying to do. So that's my concern at this point. And so that's
yeah, we'll,
point.
right, Mr. Molitor, we'll be looking at all of that because it's not just recruiting firefighters to continue in the department. That's one of the issues, but going forward, it's also response times and how do you get those to be, you know, how do you address those? So and then it's also equipment. How do you, you know, afford equipment when you have two different, there's all these things that we need to look at. So but point well made. So I think that would be absolutely looked at very seriously, what you were saying. So, okay. Anybody else want to weigh in or have questions?
I'd like to mention one thing. This is Shannon. One of the big reasons we wanted to look at this is because we have fire trucks and equipment that is 15 to 20 years old that both St. Bonnie and Mound have equipment that's wearing out. And there are economies of scale in jointly looking at sharing equipment across with a fire district instead of duplicating equipment. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that that's one of the main purposes, one of the benefits of a fire district is just the economies of scale and sharing equipment and making those joint purchases.
Yeah, exactly. And and also resources in terms of firefighters as well. So, yeah.
Right.
Mr. Chamberlain?
No, I agree with all that. I think there's pluses and minuses, but at this preliminary stage, I would say that I would agree. Let's move forward and work out those facts and see where it takes us. Obviously, it doesn't mean we're going to have a district created, but this is still early for decision making as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And Ms. Mortensen?
I agree with that. I think it is something that we should look forward, keep moving forward on. City councils need to look into the future and be proactive. And this is something that I see won't happen immediately, obviously, but something we should keep talking about. As far as volunteers, you know, it is getting harder and harder to get people to volunteer. And it's not always compensation. It is something even more important to people now, and it's time. So, you know, you might be able to offer people a lot of money, but time is more precious to a lot of people nowadays. So, you know, I think it is a problem, but, and this isn't going to happen fast if we go the district way, and it should be addressed, trying to retain and regain and gather more volunteers. But I think we should continue to move forward so that if we can make the move to a district, we'd be prepared to do it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll continue on and report back. So with that, next item is persons to be heard. Ms. Bruce had wanted to have a discussion on this. Do you want to start out?
Sure, thank you. In talking to people over the last month or few months that we've been meeting remotely or online, people have asked, well, how do they come if they want to talk to the council? And some people I know have just sent emails to the council thinking that that's all that was necessary, and they were expecting to be able to come and be heard. And there's confusion about what's required to be able to address the council at a council meeting at that part of the meeting. And I don't think there's really any reason why we can't have people call in and actually speak and address us just like they did when we were meeting in person. I don't think there's any technological issues that prevent that. I'm familiar with GoToMeeting and how you can allow people you can mute them and unmute them and allow that. So I guess I would like to reinstate residents being able to speak at our council meetings instead of having to send an email and then not be sure, well, what exactly does it have to say? And does it have to say that it has to be read at the person's to be heard part of the meeting? And all those things, I think it's confusing for people. And I think they'd just rather call into the meeting and speak like they have in the past.
Oh, I
Does
mean,
that make sense?
I don't, yeah. I mean, we don't usually have a lot of people anyway, but I would make one comment that we'd have to adhere to the same rules, if you will, that we have had in the past, especially. And I don't think that, and I've had a couple of requests by individuals to come and introduce themselves to the council, and it cannot be politically motivated or oriented in any way, shape, or form. That's not what the council is here for. So if we add that to the list of things, I have no objection to them talking. Again, it would be 3 minutes. The council doesn't make a decision regarding a request, or at that meeting we would have to give council or staff direction. I would have no problem with that.
Before others weigh in, can I just mention one thing? So if people do recall, when we actually did meet as a group, if somebody was coming for persons to be heard, they would put their name and address and the reason they're there on a clipboard at the back of the council chambers, and then Chief Falls would bring it up to the mayor as the meeting was starting. And then the mayor would read off the name and address or the name of the person that wanted to speak and the reason they want, and she'd know what it is they wanted to speak about. Maybe a hybrid sort of model could work where they could still send to me their name and the topic they want to talk about before the meeting. Doesn't have to be by noon. And then if they send me whatever, if they're not on a computer, if they're just on a phone, their phone number, so I can recognize their number. And I would be able to provide maybe the council with a short email before the start of the meeting. Here's who wants to speak tonight. Here's their name. Here's what they want to talk about. And then you would all have that info. And then it would be, just walking in blind and me clicking on, I have no idea. I mean, when you guys call in, I got to ask who's caller 1 or caller 2. So I can assign a name so I can figure out who's talking. And so if the council's okay with that method, they could still, technologically, there's no issue. We're probably still going to stay off screen. We'll just keep it audio only. But yeah, if that works for council members, that'd be fine with me.
Okay. This is Shannon. I have a question, Mr. Brony.
Yeah.
With GoToMeeting, isn't there a chat bubble that if somebody wanted to speak, they could just tell you that way when they call into the meeting? Just hit the chat bubble and send you a message?
You're probably correct. I haven't used it yet, but I think you're correct. So. Yeah,
because I've used it quite a bit, and I guess I just don't want to put impediments in people's way that they have to go through certain steps and send an email and have it announced. I think I'd like to encourage people to come and to speak freely, and if they don't know they're coming until an hour before they're on their way, I'd like to accommodate that. So if they could use that chat bubble, I think that might be a solution.
Or they just simply, anybody that calls in has to register, has to say, I'm Joe Smith. I want to have 3 minutes with the council tonight regarding whatever. We know we can see people that call in, and then we can just say, okay, we have number whatever. Please identify yourself. If they say, I'm Joe Smith, I want to speak to the council regarding whatever issue. And then we know they're there.
So, Mayor, from what I understand, if people call in via telephone, they would not have the ability to utilize a chat button. They would if they call in on a iPad or notebook, computer, or laptop, or whatever. But on a telephone, they won't have a chat button. So they'll pop in to the meeting, but I won't know who they are or what they want. So.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, if you'll be able to identify by phone numbers, those that are council members and staff, and then there'll be additional, if there are additional numbers, you'll have to have them identify themselves and then say if they are interested in speaking under persons to be heard, then what their topic is or what they want to speak about, and give their address too, right?
I believe so. Yep. I have no problem with the technologically speaking, we can accommodate it. It's just, I think we might get a few callers that we won't have any idea who they are or what they want. So, which is fine. But like I said, we've never had that in the past. We always had a clipboard with a name and a topic that they wanted to talk about when we're at live meetings.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Council?
Yeah, I think that's a solution. If they just you just ask if there's anyone that would like to speak and they just identify themselves. That's great.
Yeah, that would work. But I think a telephone won't work with a chat, but somebody else could. Yep.
Okay. Council, rest of the council, you want to weigh in?
This is John T. I don't have an issue with that. My only concern would be, again, administratively, Mr. Baroni is setting the meeting up, logging everybody's identification. So I still would like people to be able to log in prior to the meeting starting so that when we get to that section of the agenda, it's not kind of helter-skelter as to who are you and what, that type of thing. It's somehow that Mr. Baroni knows before the meeting starts, he expects 5 people, 3 people, whatever, and he knows who they are. So we just run administratively through these meetings. We know how long these meetings can take. Any confusion at one section can slow the process down.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. No, I think they would have to, just like before, when you arrive at the meeting, you had to, prior to the start of the meeting, had to sign in. So that would be the same here. Maybe they call in 6, 7, 8, whatever minutes prior to the meeting and identify themselves, identify, name, address, whatever. They want to speak under persons to be heard on such and such a topic. And then that way, Mr. Baroni knows, and he says we have 2 people here tonight for persons to be heard, or we have 1 person, or we have no one, whatever.
Right, and I think Ms. Lindquist needs their address for the record, so that's the only reason I'm bringing this up, because we do have a record-keeping reason to do this. I know the sheets that we have people sign in with their name and address and topic, that's what Ms. Lindquist hangs on to and is able to provide, put the minutes together with that. So.
Right. So, I mean, if they checked in, let's say 6 minutes before and said, then they could give Chris their address and information.
That would be just fine.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Madam Mayor, Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, I was going to suggest that same thing as you do it before the meeting starts, and then Mike can just give the name of the person and mute them at that time. He can have them muted until that point, and then he can unmute them and say, so-and-so address and things like that, and then mute them back so that way we won't have interruptions from those people during the meeting. I don't know. It's just a suggestion.
Yeah, they would not be able to speak other than during persons to be heard, unless, of course, it's a public hearing. But yeah, I mean, we'll work through that. Okay, yeah. So if they register prior to the meeting, then they can have their 3 minutes to address the council. All right, anybody else? Otherwise, we'll go with that.
I think that sounds fair.
Okay. All right. So that concludes our business items. Do we have any staff reports?
Mayor, I have two items. I mentioned one already. Bob Vose, we're trying to get him to be a participant in the Monday, September 21st council meeting. And then the only other thing I have is that we do have our next water tower progress meeting tomorrow, September 9th. And I think Ms. Polfus is on the docket next. She's got a couple of items.
All right. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mayor and council members. I just have two quick items to update the council on tonight. First is the customer service and communications assistant position vacancy. This position was advertised on the League of Minnesota Cities website for 2 weeks, which closed on August 26th. The city received 30 applications, and that was narrowed down to 5 candidates for the first round of interviews, which took place last Wednesday. Mike Baroni, Brian Grimm, and myself were on that panel. After the first round, 2 finalists were selected for a final interview, which is being held tomorrow morning. So our hope is to select a final candidate and begin the pre-employment process to get the position filled by early October. In a somewhat related item with the position vacancy, along with distant learning schedules for employees' children and various other circumstances related to COVID-19 and staff scheduling, the front desk has been a bit difficult to staff full-time. To assist with incoming calls, I investigated an automated assistant for our phone systems. This is designed to help direct incoming calls by allowing the caller to select the department they are attempting to reach. So to schedule inspections, if they have election questions, zoning land use questions, and so on. After discussion, management staff agreed this feature would be useful to implement on a short-term and limited basis. The automated assistant can be turned on and off and would likely only be used on Mondays and Thursdays until the position is filled. So it'd be on a very limited and short-term basis. And those are my 2 updates for tonight. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay. Well, obviously, since the automated assistant would be COVID related, you need to add that to your list of expenses. I know
this feature is actually not at an additional cost. It's a feature that the phone already has, right?
All right.
So unfortunately or fortunately.
Yeah. All right.
Actually, that's not entirely true. You've spent the amount of time researching this. The hours you spent researching this at your salary plus benefits is COVID related.
All right. Yep.
There you go.
You are correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right. Yeah, think of all of those things. Even even elections, they're coming up. There's a lot of COVID related things that have to be done differently that's costing the city more too. So keep that in mind. All right. Any other administrative reports, staff reports?
Madam Mayor, I do. This is Allison.
Okay.
I have a couple items for the council. One is with respect to the Sunnyfield Water Tower Maintenance Project. After the council packet went out, Osseo, the contractor for the maintenance project, submitted a letter requesting that their Sunday hours could include noise producing work. And in the previous change order that was brought to the council, the Sunday work was to be quiet work only. So I wanted to bring that request to the council's attention. Again, my apologies that it wasn't included in the packet. It wasn't received until after the packet went out. It's one of to give the council a frame of reference, the noise production would be similar to a chainsaw without ear protection, and then the trees would buffer some of that sound from the adjacent properties to the water tower. And if there's other information I can provide to the council, I can do that as well. If there's any questions that I can answer at this time, I can do that as well. But just looking for council direction if that's something that the council would be willing to allow on Sunday.
Okay.
Days would that be, Allison?
What's that?
How many Sundays are we talking about?
They have until the end of October to complete their work. So I think we're looking at
7 or 8
here.
7 to 8 weeks.
7.
Yeah.
That would be 7. Yes.
It's 7 additional work days, and I'm trying to be cognizant. I think our staff is trying to be cognizant of our vendor here trying to get their work done. They've already added a bunch of people. I think they're a little concerned about hitting the deadline. That's their problem, but it ends up being our problem. So I'd like to make sure that they could have all the time they want, especially when you have a day, get rainy days. We have no prediction on the weather, obviously. So we asked them to submit this so we could discuss it with you. But like I said, I'm just trying to make sure this gets done. And if this helps them, I'm for it. I understand that it's in a position for our residents, but I think my guess is they'd rather see it done than not done. So
are they limited from making noise all day Sunday, or is it just during the morning hours, or what's the stipulation for limiting noise on Sunday?
We said
normally.
Normally right now they wouldn't even be able to work, but we let them because we allowed them not to be super noisy. Now we're going to say turn it loose.
Could we say after 10 a.m. on Sunday? I just don't want people waking up Sunday morning mad.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Well, the other issue.
I think the hour we were talking about was from 7 to 8. I thought, and I believe that was a caveat that I had asked for, that on Sundays they didn't start noise making until 8 o'clock in the morning. In fact, I think that's part of one of our ordinances.
It is.
So they're really just talking about adding that from 7 to 8 hour, probably.
I think that was
I'm not.
Saturday, not Sunday.
Right.
That was Saturday, yeah. But I'm not interested in noise at 7 a.m. on Sundays. Maybe 10 would be okay. I understand giving them time to do their work, but on the other hand, we also have to be somewhat considerate of our residents too. I mean, even 10 to 6 would be better. I'm sorry.
Mike, have you received any noise complaints so far about this project?
I have not. They don't always reach my desk. Sometimes they reach Allison's desk. Sometimes they reach Gary's desk. I don't know if either of those guys can tell us. I think Gary's off the call now, but Allison, have you received anything?
I have not. To my knowledge, they haven't done any of the sandblasting work yet, and that's the noise producing work.
So, council, where do you stand? I mean, 7 a.m. seems a bit early to me for a Sunday morning, but that's just me.
This is Shannon. I'd be okay with 9 o'clock. I think any earlier than that, I think we're going to have people getting mad. But I think 9 o'clock would be fine.
Okay. Anybody else disagree with that?
I agree on that.
Okay.
I'd agree with that.
John. All right.
Do we have hold on. Do we have an end time established then or not?
Yeah, I was going to say 8 hours. So 9 to 5 would be 8 hours.
Well, what's their normal weekday work schedule and Saturday work schedule? What were our hours of allowing? I mean, just in our ordinance, isn't it like 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. or something like that.
I think yeah,
7 to 7.
I think it's 7.
7 to
Yeah.
7, David says. So if we had them start at 9, we'd cut short their time by 2 hours from 12 to 10.
We're not really cutting short their hours. We're actually giving them
Just-
8 more hours with
Right,
noise.
but they were asking for 12 just to run it like a normal day. And if our council says, don't let them start pounding away till 9 a.m., then they could do some quiet work before 9, but they could cut it loose then at 9 a.m.
Right.
It would be till 7 p.m., which is be in line with our other days of the week, or our ordinance as it currently stands for other days of the week.
But they could
I'm
also
fine
do
with 9
quiet
till
noise.
7.
What's that?
They could
Mayor?
also do quiet noise after that. They could also do quiet noise after that. It's not that they can't work. It's just we're saying,
Right,
sandblasting. I mean, how many days
So-
are they going to need to sandblast?
A lot. And the reason they're asking is because they want to make sure they get this done. Otherwise they wouldn't ask.
Okay.
I'm
All right.
fine with 9 to 7.
Yeah. I understand what Councilmember Bruce is saying. At 7 a.m. you hear the sandblaster going. That's probably not too nice, but 9 o'clock, I think most people are up by 9. Unless they were out really late the night before, but most people are up by 9.
Hey, rest of the council is okay with.
I would say 9 to 7. We need to get it done. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's unfortunate it's come to this, but that's why they're asking, because they want to make sure they get it done. So cross our fingers they will.
Okay. I think we'll be
When we had a
disappointed.
conference call with them, I wasn't too happy with what was going on. They knew it too. I let them have it. So they got to get this done. That's what I told them. No excuses.
All right. Well, we'll see if we get complaints. All right.
Agreed.
Allison, anything else?
I had one more item, Madam Mayor, an update to the council regarding the County Road 110 West extension. That's, the council may recall, that's a city road that goes to the Gale Woods farm. We reached out to Three Rivers Park District with a proposal, an idea to vacate that right away and turn it over to Three Rivers. Three Rivers, it's actually a timely request for them. They are looking to do some mill and overlay work. I believe it was 2022. So they could certainly pull this in to that project. They had indicated looking to the city for for whatever funding the city was going to put into a mill and overlay that could be considered a payment to them, so to speak. But they're willing to work with us, and just wanted to let council know about that, and if there's any sentiment that we can provide to Three Rivers Park District as far as moving this process forward.
Well, my
Councilmember
understanding was. Yeah, go ahead.
If we're going to give them the money to do the project, then we'll just keep the road. That's the whole point of doing that. So either they take it or not.
They can either do the project or we don't do the road. I mean,
Well,
I agree.
I knew this might come up. I talked with Mr. Abel about it. This is no different than when the county does a turn back on a road and the city, us, would say to them, well, you guys got to get it to some semblance of good maintenance. We're not going to take your crappy road and then we got to fix it. So you got to fix it before you turn it back to us. This is no different than that. So if you guys on the council are going to say, well, if we're going to fix it, we can keep it. We could certainly do that. We could fix it and keep it, but you'll still have to keep fixing it in the future. If we fix it and give it to them, then we're done fixing this road.
But that's also why we don't do too many turnbacks either.
Well, we don't have the turnbacks. Yeah, the city does.
No, I mean we don't take too many in.
Right. No, that's true. I mean, I think the original intent of this I think Mayor Whalen brought it up, was to not have to deal with the maintenance of the road. But as you see, most people, including us, if we're going to take something on, we don't want to take on a pile of crap. You know, we want their road to be okay before the county would turn back a road to the city. We wouldn't accept it. And so that's exactly why Three Rivers is saying that to us. They don't want to inherit a cruddy road that they got to spend a lot of money fixing up if they're going to have to take it from us or want to take it from us.
Well, can we, we need to think about this. I'm not prepared to make a decision tonight. A lot of times when you have to make a fast decision, they're not good decisions. So I think it's better if we can digest it, think about it, and then maybe make a decision sometime later on. Allison, did they indicate when we had to make a decision? I mean, we really put it in their ballpark, and now they're putting it back in our lap.
Certainly. What I'll convey, Madam Mayor, I don't think this is time sensitive. They're just looking at long term if they should include this in their planning. So we can respond to them and indicate that the council needs some time to consider the discussion about the payment for an overlay, and just continue those discussions.
I wouldn't say consider payment for an overlay, because as Mike Molitor said, if we're going to pay for it, then we might as well do it. So I would say we just aren't ready to make a decision of any kind at this point.
Okay, I can certainly do that.
Okay, all right.
That was all I had, Madam
all right.
Mayor.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Do we have any council reports?
Madam Mayor, quickly, I do need a volunteer for the September 28th Planning Commission meeting. There will be a meeting.
Okay. Do we have Mr. Molitor? Would you be able to attend that?
Yeah, I can do that.
All right. You have your volunteer, David.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else?
Well,
this is Shannon.
Go ahead, Shannon.
Thanks. I just had a question of something, if it's going to be on our agenda next time, and it's related to elections. We had established the election judges and ballot board for the primary, and we need to do that again for the general election. Are we going to do that on the 21st?
Madam Mayor?
I guess that's a question for Chris.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Yes, I have it for the September 21st council meeting. We do have quite a few applicants to become election judges. You will probably just I don't know if they'll be trained by then, but you'll be able to vote or accept them. And then, like we talked at the prior meeting about this, how we're doing the absentee ballot board is the judges are just letting me know if they're interested in doing it. And then we'll, like I told you before, we'll just draw a name from a hat and do it for the, there's a schedule of when they need to be done and sent to Hennepin County. And I'll just set that up ahead of time. And we'll have our different absentee ballot board members.
Most of the election judges aren't even aware that there is any such thing as a ballot board. So I'd suggest you might want to call the election judges and ask them if they'd like to be on the ballot board.
Actually, Councilmember Bruce, they were all told about it at their training that took place in July or whenever
so
we did. I believe it was July.
Okay, I just want to make sure they were given the opportunity to know about it.
Yes, they were all given the opportunity, and when I train the new set of judges in the next couple weeks, they'll be told the same thing.
Okay,
they
great.
can
We'll just
email me separately. And so basically what you'll do is you'll approve all the election judges and approve them all for absentee ballot board, and then it's up to them to decide if they want to sign up for it or not.
Okay.
Is that
Thank
okay?
you. Yep.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Chumperland, you had a report?
Just the August meeting for the Pioneer Sarah Creek was canceled 2 days before the meeting due to lack of a timely agenda. So.
Okay, so you'll report back in September then. All right.
Yep,
all right, thank you.
Up on the 17th.
Yeah. All right, thank you. All right, with that, I think we are concluded with our agenda and reports. So if there's a motion to adjourn, we can be adjourned.
So moved.
So moved.
Shannon.
Okay, Ms. Mortensen made the motion and Ms. Bruce seconded. So all those in favor will signify with aye. Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
Mr. Chumperland?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Lisa Whalen. Motion passes 5-0. So we are adjourned and we will be back on the 21st. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Thank you.